Amen, and may it be so. Thank you so much, team, and everyone. You can have a seat. Aloha. How am I doing with that? I mean, I've been here 8 months. Aloha. All right? I hope you've been having a good and productive August so far, a restful August. That's been true for me. I was in Southern California from the end of July after I was delivering the message here on the 28th of July. My 1:20 flight to LAX was delayed. I wound up turning the lights out in my home in Metro LA at 2 a.m. the next morning. It was a little late. Was it a restful time? Well, I got up the next morning and I was scheduled to have breakfast with a friend in Santa Monica. I got on the freeway and I was in the middle lane and all these cars were just whizzing by me. I looked down at the speedometer. It said 60 miles per hour, which is about as fast as you can legally go on Oahu, right, on select roads. And I was reminded of the bumper sticker here. This isn't the mainland, stop driving like it. But in reverse, I think everybody around me was saying, this isn't Hawaii, stop driving like it, get with the program, So I hit the accelerator and everything was fine. My time was really good visiting my family in Santa Barbara, friends in Ventura, Orange County, LA County, and seeing to my home in Metro LA, just the domestic stuff. It was good to be in my own home. Good for me. I was thinking about life, about my life, about your life, about our future, what God has in store for us. And my message to you from God, I think, is a very simple one, and that is, when it comes to your life, my life, our future, the future of this church, the word is, trust me with all of it. Trust God with all of that. We're First Presbyterian Church of Honolulu. We've been hearing that this morning, that we are joining Jesus to restore and transform one another and our world. That's the business that we're in. That's what we're about as a community, as a movement. And we do that with these values. We do that with prayer when we're at our best. We do that with prayer, with humility, with the grace and truth of Jesus. And we do that with courage. Trust God with all of that. Now, the question arises, how do you trust God with all of that? And that brings us to our series that we begin this morning. You've already heard about it. Trust. 4 weeks. It's just a short series. We're rounding out the summer with this into the early part of September. We're rounding out and wrapping up the middle portion of the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 6. Jesus wants to talk with us about trust. Some of you know that my mother, at the age of 100, went to be with the Lord on Valentine's Day 2.5 years ago, just a day after Pastor Tim Shaw's mother, at age 100, went to be with the Lord. They're best friends now, I'm sure. My brother and I, Brother Todd, older brother, and I were sitting with our mother at her bedside one evening just days before she passed, and we said many things to her, mostly things we'd been saying to her over the previous years, but we're now reaffirming as the end was drawing near. And then at one point, my brother leaned closer and said to her, "Mom, you've been the most influential person in my life." I had never heard him say that before. But as he said that, I just quickly agreed with it, and I said the same was true for me. In fact, some days after her death, I was going through her papers, and I found a card that I had written to her with essentially those words written in the card, and she'd kept that. And the words we said were true, they are true, and they're true because our mother embodied in her life Jesus' very words to us this morning as we begin our series. And these are words that every child in this church, every young person in your sphere of influence needs to hear from you, needs to see in you, more importantly. We can say one thing and do another, but these are the words that Jesus has to say to us this morning. They're on the screen, they're in your bulletin if you picked one up. This is it. chapter 6, verse 19, he says this. He says, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust consume, and where thieves break in and steal. But," he continues, "that is instead, store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust consumes, and where thieves do not break in and steal." Let me read those lines again. We can have them on the screen again. Number one, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust consume and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust consumes and where thieves do not break in and steal. All right. So what's Jesus talking about? I want you to turn to the person next to you. Have you missed this? Turning to the person next to you. I'm back. And I want you to tell the person next to you in a sentence or two what Jesus is talking about. Let me give you a few seconds to do that. Turn to each other and answer the question, what's Jesus talking about? Go ahead. So you might say that Jesus is talking about investing. What are you giving yourself to? What are you investing your life in? What are you setting your eyes upon? Investments. And what Jesus says about storing up for yourselves treasures on earth, what he says about investing in treasures on earth includes all kinds of things. For example, it includes, well, I guess what you'd normally think of, stocks and bonds. Those are investments, the financial markets. But it could also include real estate. Not everybody here owns a home. Many of you do own your own home, maybe multiple properties. Treasures on earth would include investments in precious metals, buy gold, or art, or other valuable objects, collectibles like cars, or surfboards, or Turkish carpets. I bought my first Turkish carpet in 2012 as I was leaving Turkey after 8 years there, and I thought, I need to take something home. Now I have 16 Turkish carpets. I brought 3 of them here, 1 for the office, 2 for the house. As my carpet dealer in Turkey says, it becomes a sickness. Jesus is talking as well here about the things we just dream about if you don't have them, things you plan for, things you save up for, all the objects that we think lead to happiness, guarantee satisfaction, investing in symbols of the good life that say you've made it. Oh yeah, okay, you've got a house, but what about the second house, the vacation house, or the boats, the trips, the clothes, the jewelry, recreational toys? If you don't have these, you dream about them, you make them your goal. Back to our young people, our kids, what they need to hear, what they need to know. I think it's notable how utterly materialistic some of them become. What made them that way? Who made them that way? Speaking of treasures on earth, Jesus' words would also include investing in your reputation, your social standing, your capital as a person, your position in the pecking order, building a career reputation, to be known and highly regarded, enjoying, as the old King James Bible language puts it, the praise of men. Earthly treasures. Jesus is talking about investments of all kinds in the teaching this morning, and he says, don't store up for yourselves, that's the important phrase, don't store up for yourselves those kinds of things, treasures on earth. Don't do that. Now, is Jesus serious? Yes, he's serious. Take him seriously. I don't think we really do. Is he speaking in extreme, exaggerated terms? He's done that before in the Sermon on the Mount. We've seen that. Yes, he is speaking in extreme, exaggerated terms in a way. For example, is he saying don't even have a bank account? No, he's not saying that. I mean, he was a self-supporting person as a tradesman, most likely before he began his ministry. Perhaps he drew on some of his stored-up funds once he began his ministry. We don't know that for sure, but we would be safe to assume that. We do know that he depended on the stored-up funds of other people. Luke chapter 8, don't turn there right now, but the first 3 verses tell us that Jesus and the 12 were accompanied by a group of core women who are named there, and it says many others, men and women, and then it says who provided for them, that is Jesus and the 12, out of their resources. They had stored up some treasures on earth, as it were, perhaps for themselves, but those things stop being for themselves. They begin to give those things away for Jesus and his movement, and Jesus accepted those earthly treasures. We also read in John 13 that Judas kept the community purse and that he actually stole from it from time to time. They were using someone's stored up treasure, the contribution. So what's Jesus doing here in this passage with what he's saying? Well, he's poking around and he's probing how much you are investing in and storing up treasures, earthly treasures, for yourselves, and why you're doing it so much, and whether it's a smart idea. And in Jesus' opinion this morning, very clear, if you're doing a lot of that, that's not a smart idea. In Jesus' opinion, it's a dumb idea. And it's a dumb idea because, well, what does it say? Why does he think it's a dumb idea? Turn to that person again next to you. It's been a while, so I just want you to do that this morning a lot. Turn to the person next to you and tell them the reason Jesus gives, or the reasons Jesus gives, for this being a dumb idea to invest so much in earthly treasures. Just turn to each other and talk. A few seconds. It's a dumb idea because such investments, as necessary as some of them are, they just don't last. Storing up treasures on earth cannot stand up to all the natural forces. He uses moth and rust as symbolic. All those natural forces which literally eat away at and eventually eat up all the baskets you're putting so many of your eggs in, and not to mention the eggs themselves. That is, if the thieves don't break in and steal them before the moth and rust get to them. So many of those investments are just not worth it in the end. They're not worth all that you're putting into them. They're not worthy of you because they just don't have the staying power. They don't keep paying the dividends that you think they will. They don't deliver as promised, as we're told they will deliver. They ultimately fade away. They're bad investments. And I was reminded just the other day of the story of what passed between two people at a rich man's funeral. You've heard this. One attendee asked, How much did he leave behind? The other answered, all of it. You don't see hearses pulling U-Haul trailers, do you? No, it's all left behind. It's left then for the kids, who then get the chance to fight over it all and further divide and ruin the family if the wealth hasn't done that already. I've heard of that a lot. I've seen it in my own extended family. Two siblings suing each other. Money is a funny thing. It's a powerful thing. Jesus talks about money and wealth and greed more than any other topic in his teaching. He talks about money, wealth, and greed 10 times as often as he talks about adultery. Why is that? Because he loves you. He knows that money is a power that can distract you and trick you and absorb you and destroy you. That's why he talks about it so much. In a sense, it's his biggest rival. The Apostle Paul, writing to his protege Timothy, in his first letter to Timothy, chapter 6, verses 9 and 10, this is what Paul says, who felt the same way as Jesus. He says, but those who want to be rich. Anybody here want to be rich? Oh, you can say, we don't want to be rich. We're not the 1%, the so-called 1%. Well, we live lives beyond the imagination of just about everybody who originally heard these words, and for most of the people living on the planet today. For those who want to be rich, fall into temptation, this is what Paul says, and are trapped by many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. Are we telling our young people that? Saying it that clearly and directly? Or are we not telling them that? Or are we telling them that, but then living lives that just say, we're not serious? And Paul didn't really know what he was talking about. And then how about this? He's not finished. He says to Timothy, for the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil, and in their eagerness to be rich, some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pains. Boy, talk about ancient wisdom. I've seen plenty of that. I've seen children and youth in fantastic churches who get the Bible memory verse and recite it, and then they grow up and they go off and they chase after wealth and all kinds of other pretty things that don't last and pierce themselves with many pains. Yeah, Jesus again, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust consume and where thieves break in and steal. What is the love of money and storing up treasures on earth really about? It's about trust. What are you putting your trust in? It's about your anxiety and managing your anxiety and soothing yourself, your need for security, your need for assurance, your desire to fill up that spiritually empty place within with things that do not satisfy, that don't deliver. You know, I did a burial at sea some years ago, a disposition of ashes, spreading of ashes over the waters. And the deceased, John, had been a physician. He was a member of our church. I was serving a church in Port Hueneme. I've mentioned this church to you before. This place located between Santa Barbara and Malibu on the California coast. That sounds really sexy, doesn't it? But we were a lot like Oahu. All the classes thrown together on the Oxnard Plain, all the races, and then the Navy with its own culture, big South Pacific Islander, as they said, community because of the Navy, Latino, black, white. Not a lot of Asians, interestingly enough, but a real mix. So we took his sailboat out, said some words of committal, and spread his remains on the water. about a mile offshore. And that was it. Well, that wasn't it, because John was a believer. He was a follower of Jesus. So he was and is in the presence of the Lord with my mother and Pastor Timo's mother, even now. But you know, for many people, that would be it in some sense. And then following this whole thing, there was a big reception. He was a very well-known guy, loved guy. And the reception was, get this, at the Pacific Corinthian Yacht Club in Channel Islands Harbor. That's the harbor that was there. And there were a lot of people there with boats and with lives packed full of other stored up treasures on earth who were not followers of Jesus, and I was given the microphone. So I told them the story in Luke chapter 12. We have the address on the screen, but we're not going to have the whole thing there on the screen. But I want to tell it to you. It's sometimes called the parable of the rich fool. And this is how it goes. Verse 13 of chapter 12. Someone in the crowd said to him, that is Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me." You know, these kind of disputes have been going on for thousands of years. But he, that is Jesus, said to him, "Friend," I love that, just calls him friend. "Friend, who set me to be a judge or arbitrator over you?" And he, that is Jesus, said to them, that is the crowds who were there, he just turns this into a teaching moment. He said, "Take care, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. For one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." Boy, that'll preach. America, are you listening? Life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. Then he, that is Jesus, told them, the crowd, a parable to make the point that your life doesn't consist in how much you have. Here's the parable. Jesus launches into it. He said, "The land of a rich man produced abundantly." Jesus is all about producing and productivity. Great. "And he," that is the rich man, "thought to himself, 'What should I do, for I have no place to store my crops?'" Good question. "I will pull down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods, and I will say to my soul," he'll have a little conversation with himself, "Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years." What arrogance. "Relax, eat, drink, be merry." Boy, how many times have you heard that in advertisements through every device you ever turn on? The parable continues, "But God said to him," God's having a conversation with himself here, "You fool, this very night your life is being demanded of you, and the things that you have prepared, whose will they be?" Jesus concluded then, "So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves," there it is, "but are not rich towards God." It's not about the productivity, it's what you do with what you produce. You want to invest in the next generation in this church? That's a story you want your kids to learn, memorize, and internalize, because many may already be catching a deadly case of affluenza. Not influenza, affluenza, from affluence. Just by living where we do, living with you maybe, hanging around with grandma and grandpa who made really good, or maybe not so well off grandma and grandpa, or you or the neighbors, but who are nevertheless thinking about greedy things all the times, and they're catching a case of it, and they're assaulted constantly with all the messages, if you have this, if you buy this, if you go there, if you do this, you're going to be happy. Back to the burial at sea reception. So the conversations were going, the alcohol was flowing. I told the story, and then I said, you know, there's a lot of stored up treasure represented right here. And it got really quiet. And I talked about how flimsy and fleeting it all is. And I talked about the person of Jesus and his invitation to everyone. Not everybody was happy with me. But it needed to be said. I mean, John's life and now his death were challenging all the flimsy investments in the room, all the treasure people were putting their trust in. Some of you know the pastor-writer Max Lucado. He is known to say every major decision in life ought to be made in a graveyard. Just to remind you of what's lasting and what is not. Are you asking yourself on a regular basis, is this direction I'm going to go? Is this investment I'm going to make? Is this thing, this venture that's requiring my time and energy, is it going to be worth it? Treasures on earth, they're necessary in some measure, but they don't last. Treasures in heaven? If Jesus knows what he's talking about, apparently they do last. And again, Jesus is not against ambition. He elevates it. He celebrates it. He just says if it's money, if it's things that you're after, what money can buy for you, you're shooting too low. All right, so we're almost done. But I have another question for you. What would treasures in heaven be? What is Jesus referring to by treasures in heaven? I want you to turn to this is the last time. Turn to the person next to you. Give them some examples of what treasures in heaven might be. What's Jesus talking about? Talk to each other. So treasures in heaven. Investing in and loving God. Okay, well, what does that look like? It looks like investing in and loving people. That's what it looks like. Not storing up treasures for yourselves, but storing up and then using treasures for other people. Sure, you got to put some away for retirement. I do that. Jesus is not saying that's wrong. He's just saying, where's the money, a lot of the money going? God didn't give it to you just to sit on it. A big part of God love is neighbor love. Being rich toward God by being rich towards people. Compassion International, Compassion Child, it's so great. You've got so many in this church. I've been supporting a Compassion Child for about 6 years. Your sister church in Milpitas, Silicon Valley, they're as big as you are with supporting Compassion Children. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. That's a great way to store up treasures in heaven. Look at this one. Proverbs 19, verse 17. Those who lend to the poor lend to the Lord. Isn't that interesting? That's worth sitting with for a week. I don't need to tell you how to invest in God and neighbor. The Sermon on the Mount and everything in it, it gives you lots of ways to do that. One more thing and then we're done. Jesus now gets really personal. He gives one more reason why not to overly invest your best time, energy, life, and love in things and money in things that don't last. And this is it, the last verse of the passage this morning. He says, verse 21, For where your treasure is, you've probably heard this, there your heart will be also. It's all about what you love. And if your heart is with things that won't last, that means you won't last. And just extend that out into eternity. But if your heart is with things that do last, heavenly things, you will last for a long, long time. It was C.S. Lewis who put it this way. He said, if you set your sights on heaven and the things of heaven, you get earth thrown in. If you set your sights solely on earth, you get neither. Give yourself to treasures in heaven. We have spiritual steps of the week. I want you to ask God these 3 simple questions. They're in the booklet, they're in the bulletin. Number 1, where have I been investing? Just do some personal inventory. What's getting your time and your energy, your imagination, your money? Where have I been investing? Make a list. Number 2, how lasting are my investments? So you make your list, and then step 2 is evaluate them. How lasting are they? And then number 3, what do you, God, want me to do about what I discover? Just ask that question, and then do whatever he tells you. Let me pray for us. Father, help us to believe the authoritative words of your Son. Help us to believe that he really knew what he was talking about, that he was an expert on living life and what the key to happiness would be and what a lasting legacy looks like. Open up our hearts and our minds, getting at really what we're putting our trust in. What are we anxious about, and what are we trying to do about that? And then help us to make a course correction in as much as we need to do that. Because we want to trust you. We say we do, even on our coinage. In God we trust. Really? We want to trust you. Help us. In the name of Jesus, amen.